Welcome, traveller of time, to a sanctuary of quiet and calm. As the world outside slows its pace, let your breath settle into a soft, steady rhythm. Inhale the stillness of this moment and exhale the lingering thoughts of the day. Tonight, we are going to journey backward through the mists of time, returning to a distant age when the rhythm of human life was completely intertwined with the shifting moods of the earth. Allow your mind to drift away from the present, leaving behind the warmth of the modern world as we travel over 1100 years into the past, to the British Isles in the late autumn of the year 1860. The air is growing crisp, the twilight is lingering longer over the rolling hills of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and a deep historic quiet is about to settle upon the land. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the River Thames during the middle of the 9th century. In this era, the river is not just a body of water, it is the vital artery of a growing civilization, a silver highway that carries the lifeblood of the kingdoms of Wessex and Mercia. Wooden boats glide softly across its surface, bringing grain from rural farms, fish from the coastal waters, and wood from the deep ancient forests to small, bustling settlements. The sound of water lapping against the shore is a comforting, constant melody that the local people have known for generations. But as November arrives in the year 860, an unusual silence begins to creep over the landscape. A powerful, invisible force is moving down from the extreme north, carrying an unprecedented wave of Arctic air that will soon change the course of history for everyone living in this vulnerable land. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a pale amber glow across the vast English countryside, the temperature begins to drop with an astonishing, unfamiliar speed. The frost, which usually dusts the grass like a delicate white powder, begins to harden into a thick crystalline crust that covers the earth. In the small thatched roof villages scattered along the river valleys, the Anglo-Saxon farmers notice a strange sharpness in the air, a cold so pure and intense that it catches in their throats. The mud along the riverbanks, usually soft and pliable, freezes solid within a matter of hours, turning as hard as stone under the weight of the encroaching night. It is the beginning of an extraordinary climate anomaly, a winter so severe that it will challenge the very boundaries of human survival and leave an indelible mark on the memory of the British Isles. As you listen to the gentle rustle of the wind in the bare branches of the ancient oaks, feel yourself safely cocooned in warmth, entirely protected from the bitter cold of the past. If you find comfort in these historical journeys and wish to travel with us through more peaceful, forgotten stories of our world, please take a soft moment to subscribe to our channel. Leave a gentle like and share this quiet space with others who seek relaxation. Let your eyes grow heavy as the darkness deepens over the ancient landscape of Britain, and allow yourself to sink further into the soft embrace of sleep, knowing that you are completely secure, watching the great winter of 860 unfold from a place of perfect peace and comfort. The cold that descended upon the British Isles in the late autumn of 860 was unlike anything the oldest elders of the villages could recall. It did not arrive with the familiar, gradual transition of normal seasons, but rather like an invisible heavy blanket of absolute stillness that smothered the land. In the 9th century, the Anglo-Saxon people lived in profound harmony with nature, their daily routines entirely dictated by the rising of the sun and the shifting of the winds. They were a resilient people, accustomed to damp winters and chilly rains, but they were entirely unprepared for the sheer intensity of the Arctic air mass that had drifted far south from the polar regions, locking the entire island in an icy grip. In the fields surrounding the timber-framed villages, the ground became impenetrable. For generations, farmers had relied on the late autumn weeks to finish preparing the soil and ensuring that their homesteads were secure for the dark months ahead. But by the middle of November, the earth had hardened into a grey, unyielding iron. The wooden ploughs, tipped with precious iron shares, could no longer cut through the soil. Instead, they bounced uselessly off the frozen surface, risking breakage that a village could ill afford. The grass in the common pastures, which usually provided sustenance for the sheep and cattle well into the edge of winter, was suddenly encased in a thick layer of rime frost, making it completely inaccessible to the animals. Inside the small single-room longhouses, families gathered closely around the central hearths. These homes, built with wattle and daub walls and heavy thatched roofs, were designed to retain the heat of an open fire, but the extreme cold of 860 tested their construction to the absolute limit. Smoke rose lazily toward the thatch, creating a warm but hazy atmosphere inside, while just inches away outside the thick wooden doors the world was freezing solid. The air inside the homes smelled of burning oak, dried peat, and the damp wool of cloaks hung up to dry. Every breath taken outside formed a thick white cloud that dissipated slowly in the frozen air, a constant reminder of the fragile boundary between the warmth of life and the bitter reality of the environment. As the days grew shorter, the light of the sun took on a pale, watery quality, hovering low on the southern horizon for only a few brief hours before dipping back into the long freezing night. The stars appeared exceptionally bright and sharp in the cloudless, obsidian sky, twinkling with a cold brilliance that offered no comfort to the watchful villagers below. In the monasteries, where monks kept diligent records of the passing years, the ink began to thicken and freeze in their wells, forcing the scribes to hold their small pottery containers close to the candles just to write a few precious lines. It was a time when the natural world seemed to suspend its breath, entering a deep, profound slumber that threatened to isolate every community, every family, and every living soul within their own tiny pockets of warmth. By the time December arrived, the true gravity of the climate anomaly became terrifyingly apparent along the banks of the River Thames. This great river, which had always been a fluid, moving entity, began to slow down. At first, small crystals of ice, known as frazzle ice, began to form in the quiet eddies and shallow bays near the riverbanks. These tiny translucent plates floated gently on the water, swirling in the slow current like fallen autumn leaves made of glass. But as the nights grew longer and the temperatures dropped even further into depths never before recorded in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, these independent crystals began to cohere, forming larger sheets of pancake ice that bumped and ground against one another with a low, clicking sound that echoed through the misty mornings. Within days, the miraculous and terrifying transformation was complete. The River Thames, the great economic artery of southern England, froze solid from bank to bank. For miles, from the upper reaches near Oxford down through the marshy settlements that would one day become London, the water was entirely immobilized. The surface was no longer a moving mirror reflecting the grey sky. It was a vast jagged highway of thick opaque ice tinted with shades of deep blue and frosty white. For the residents of the river valleys, this was an apocalyptic sight. A river of such volume and movement was never supposed to stand still. Children who had spent their entire lives watching the water flow now walked out onto its edges, staring down through the thick crust at the dark, silent world trapped beneath. The freezing of the Thames instantly shattered the fragile infrastructure of the region. In the 9th century, moving heavy goods across the muddy, rutted tracks of England was an exhausting and often impossible task, especially during the wet winter months. The river was the only reliable way to transport bulk goods over long distances. Large wooden barges filled with firewood from the high forests, grain from the storage barns of Wiltshire, and salt from the coastal pans were suddenly frozen in place, trapped like insects in amber. Some vessels were crushed by the immense pressure of the expanding ice, their wooden hulls groaning and splintering under a force that no shipwright could have anticipated. The supply lines that fed the growing towns and monastic communities were severed in an instant. As the realization of their isolation set in, a profound quietude settled over the river towns. The usual sounds of the waterfront, the splashing of oars, the calling of merchants, the creaking of wooden rigging, were replaced by an eerie total silence. Occasionally the ice would shift or crack under the immense thermal stress, sending a loud booming report like thunder echoing across the frozen landscape, a sound that made the villagers cross themselves in fear. The river had changed from a provider of life and connection into a massive, impenetrable barrier, a symbol of nature's absolute power to halt the ambitions of humans and isolate them within the frozen borders of their own immediate neighborhoods. With the great river frozen solid and the rudimentary roads buried under drifts of powdery snow, the Anglo-Saxon settlements entered a period of absolute harrowing isolation. In the 9th century, there were no telegraphs, no paved highways, and no centralized relief systems to aid a community in distress. Each village was an island of its own, surrounded by miles of dense, frozen woodland and desolate fields. A journey that would normally take a single day on horseback now became a perilous expedition that could cost a man his life. The snow, driven by biting winds from the North Sea, accumulated in deep ravines and filled the hollow ways, obscuring the landmarks that travellers had used for centuries to find their way across the countryside. This total isolation meant that news as well as resources ceased to travel. A village situated just 5 miles from a major monastic centre or a royal estate had no way of knowing if their neighbours were surviving or if they had already succumbed to the bitter cold. The absence of information bred a deep sense of vulnerability among the peasantry. In their small wooden homes, with the wind howling through the cracks in the timbers, the farmers could only look out at the white landscape and wonder if the rest of the kingdom had also fallen into this eternal winter. The world had shrunk to the size of the room they occupied, the family members they could see, and the dwindling supply of firewood stacked against the outside wall. The breakdown of communication also had a devastating impact on the local markets. In normal times, even during the winter, villagers would gather at local crossroads or near prominent churches to trade flax, dried fish, pottery, and small livestock. These gatherings were essential not only for economic survival, but also for maintaining the social fabric of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. With the freeze of 860, the markets vanished. The paths to the meeting places were completely blocked by snowdrifts that reached the height of a man's shoulder. No merchants arrived from the coast. No peddlers brought salt or iron. The small coins of the realm, the silver pennies minted by the kings of Wessex, became entirely useless, for there was nothing to buy and no one to sell to. Inside the isolated homesteads, the rhythm of life slowed to a crawl. Conserving energy became the ultimate law of survival. Every movement was calculated to expend as few calories as possible. The villagers spent the long hours of darkness wrapped in coarse wool blankets and animal skins, listening to the eerie silence of the frozen world outside. The only sound was the occasional snapping of a tree branch in the nearby forest, exploding like a small firework as the moisture inside the wood froze and expanded. It was a test of endurance unlike any other, a period where time itself seemed to have frozen solid along with the landscape, leaving humanity to wait in the dark, praying for a thaw that seemed further away with each passing frozen day. As the weeks of December ground slowly onward, the most insidious threat of the winter of 860 began to manifest deep beneath the frozen crust of the earth. In the agricultural cycle of Anglo-Saxon England, autumn was the time for planting the crucial winter wheat and rye crops. These seeds, carefully saved from the autumn harvest, were sown in the earth with the expectation that they would take root during the mild, damp months, resting quietly under the soil before bursting into green shoots at the first sign of spring. This winter crop was the absolute foundation of the kingdom's food security, providing the early harvest that would sustain the population through the lean summer months of the following year. But the extraordinary depth of the 860 frost changed everything. The cold did not merely sit upon the surface of the land. It drove deep into the earth, penetrating far below the standard frost line that the Anglo-Saxon farmers had adapted to over centuries. The soil became a solid, petrified block, freezing the delicate seeds where they lay in their furrows. Cut off from the residual warmth of the deep earth, the structure of the grain was utterly destroyed by the formation of internal ice crystals. When moisture cannot move, life cannot be sustained. Deep in the dark, frozen ground, the potential harvest of the coming year was quietly ruined, turning to a useless black rot within the icy soil. The destruction of the winter wheat was a slow-motion catastrophe that the farmers could do nothing to prevent. They could not dig into the iron earth to check on their seeds, nor could they re-sow the fields even if they possessed extra grain, for the ground remained completely impenetrable. Every day that the temperature remained below freezing was another day that ensured the coming spring would bring no green shoots, no promise of abundance, and no relief from the hunger that was already beginning to gnaw at the edges of the villages. The very future of the kingdom's food supply was being systematically erased by the silent, unrelenting power of the Arctic air. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. While the future crops lay ruined beneath the frozen soil, a more immediate crisis was unfolding within the village barns and shelters. In the agricultural landscape of 9th century Britain, livestock were not just a source of food, they were the essential power engine of the entire societal structure. Oxen were required to pull the heavy wooden ploughs, sheep provided the wool necessary for clothing to ward off the damp climate, and cattle were the measure of a family's wealth and long-term security. As the winter of 860 deepened its icy grip, these precious animals found themselves facing an environment that their bodies were never built to endure. The primary challenge was the sudden and absolute disappearance of fodder. In a standard English winter, livestock could survive by grazing on the resilient winter grasses, or by consuming the modest stores of hay gathered during the high summer. However, the unexpected speed and intensity of the November freeze had caught many farmers by surprise, preventing them from collecting a sufficient reserve of dried grass. Furthermore, the thick, unyielding crust of ice and hardened snow that now coated every pasture made it impossible for sheep or cattle to dig down to the frozen grass beneath. The animals were left standing in the bitter wind, their breath forming instantly into icicles around their noses, with nothing to eat but the bark of frozen trees. As the weeks advanced, the lack of nutrition combined with the unprecedented drop in temperature began to take a heavy toll. The simple shelters built for the animals, often nothing more than three-sided wooden lean-tos thatched with reeds, offered little protection against the piercing wind that blew directly from the Arctic. The cattle, weakened by hunger, could no longer generate enough body heat to survive the long sub-zero nights. One by one, the pride of the village herds began to succumb to the cold. Farmers would wake in the dim light of dawn to find their most valuable oxen frozen stiff in their stalls, their bodies as rigid as the ground they lay upon. The loss of these animals was a psychological blow as much as an economic one. For an Anglo-Saxon family, watching a prime ox perish was like watching their own future security slip away. Without the oxen, how would they plough the fields when the ground finally softened? Without the sheep, how would the women spin the yarn for the next year's garments? The deaths of the livestock represented a dismantling of the tools of survival, leaving the human population increasingly vulnerable, isolated, and dependent on whatever meagre food reserves they had managed to hoard within the fragile walls of their own homes. With the loss of livestock and the destruction of the winter crops, the immediate survival of every Anglo-Saxon household depended entirely on their grain bins and preservation techniques. In the 9th century, food preservation was a fine art born of absolute necessity. After the autumn harvest, families worked tirelessly to dry, smoke, salt and pickle whatever provisions they could gather. Grains like barley, oats and rye were stored in raised wooden bins designed to keep out dampness and rodents. Meats were hung in the rafters of the longhouses, where the rising smoke from the hearth acted as a natural preservative, curing the pork and beef so it would last through the leanest months of the year. However, these traditional methods were intended to sustain a family through a typical winter, not an extended sub-zero climate anomaly. As the freeze of 1860 stretched into late December and early January, the efficiency of these storage methods was severely tested. The extreme cold created an environment where everything froze solid, including the preserved food itself. Blocks of salted meat became so hard they could not be cut with an iron knife, requiring hours of boiling over precious firewood just to make them edible. Loaves of dark rye bread turned to blocks of ice, requiring families to break them apart with axes before thawing them near the central fire. Moreover, the lack of air circulation in the tightly sealed longhouses began to cause unforeseen problems. While the cold kept rot at bay, any moisture trapped inside the grain bins from the damp autumn began to freeze into frost crystals within the grain itself. When the temperature fluctuated even slightly near the heat of the fire, this frost melted, creating localized damp pockets that encouraged the growth of destructive molds. The farmers watched in quiet desperation as their limited reserves of barley and oats, meant to be ground into flour for daily porridge, began to spoil before their eyes, reducing their daily rations to a fraction of what was needed to maintain strength. The psychological weight of watching the food storage dwindle was immense. In the dim, smoke-filled interiors of their homes, parents carefully measured out every handful of grain, knowing that each meal brought them closer to the bottom of the bin. There was no local shop to turn to, no neighbouring village with a surplus to spare, and no guarantee that the winter would break before the last grain of rye was consumed. Every member of the household, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, understood the silent mathematics of survival. When the storage bins were empty, the fire in the hearth would offer no protection against the slow, cold embrace of starvation. As the reserves of food dwindled, the struggle for survival shifted to an equally critical resource, firewood. In the depths of the winter of 860, the central hearth of an Anglo-Saxon longhouse was not a luxury, it was the centre of existence. It was the only source of light during the long 16-hour nights, the only means to cook the meagre rations of frozen grain, and the solitary shield against a cold so profound that it could stop a person's heart in their sleep. Under normal circumstances, a village would have a designated woodlot where they collected fallen branches and seasoned wood throughout the autumn, building a substantial stack near the homestead to last until spring. However, the unprecedented length and severity of this particular winter rapidly depleted these standard wood piles. By early January, many families found themselves looking at empty wood stores, forcing them to venture out into the treacherous, snow-filled forest to find fuel. Gathering wood in these conditions was a task fraught with danger. The forests of 9th century England were vast, ancient places, untamed and dense. Walking into them meant navigating drifts of snow that could swallow a man up to his waist, hiding treacherous root holes and sharp rocks beneath a deceptive, smooth white blanket. The wood that could be found in the winter forest was far from ideal. Every fallen branch and standing dead tree was encased in a thick shell of ice and soaked through with frozen moisture. Green wood or ice-logged timber does not burn easily. It spits, pops, and fills the small longhouses with a thick, acrid white smoke that stings the eyes and irritates the lungs. To make matters worse, the extreme cold made the iron of their axes brittle. A strike against a frozen oak branch could cause a precious iron axe head to fracture or shatter completely, leaving a family without the primary tool needed to harvest fuel. The scarcity of dry wood forced families into difficult choices. In some instances, neighbours began to dismantle their own outbuildings, sacrificing wooden pig pens, tool sheds and fencing just to feed the insatiable appetite of the central hearth. Every piece of timber burned was a piece of their future homestead destroyed, a structural sacrifice made to buy one more day of warmth. The fire became a demanding deity that required constant feeding, and as the available wood grew scarcer, the circle of warmth around the hearth grew smaller, forcing families to huddle closer and closer together, watching the embers fade with a growing sense of dread. As the bitter cold locked the land in a perpetual state of frost, the societal structure of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms began to experience a quiet, unprecedented strain. In the 9th century, the relationship between the peasantry and the ruling elite, the Thegns, ealdormen and the king, was built upon a system of mutual obligation. The common people provided labour, agricultural produce and taxes in the form of food rents known as form to their lords. In return, the nobility offered protection from external threats, such as the Viking raiders who frequently manned the coasts and maintained legal order across the shires. It was a delicate social balance, one that relied entirely on the steady productivity of the earth. However, the winter of 860 completely disrupted this ancient contract. With the fields turned to iron and the livestock perishing in their shelters, the peasantry had nothing left to give. The food rents that usually filled the storehouses of the local lords could not be collected. The roads were too treacherous for the king's tax collectors to travel, and even if they had managed to reach the isolated villages, they would have found empty grain bins and desperate families. The grand feasts that traditionally took place in the great timber halls of the nobility during the midwinter season were replaced by a somber, muted reality. The lords, despite their wealth and status, were finding that their own private reserves were not limitless. In the royal estates of Wessex and Mercia, the administrative machinery of the kingdom ground to a halt. The kings of this era were itinerant, meaning they moved with their royal court from one estate to another, consuming the food rents stored at each location before moving on to the next. This system kept the king visible to his subjects and allowed him to administer justice across his lands. But the freezing of the Thames and the total burial of the highway systems made royal travel impossible. King Ethelbert of Wessex, who had only recently ascended the throne in 860, found his court trapped in place, unable to receive reports from distant shires or project royal authority beyond the immediate vicinity of his palace. This paralysis of the state created an eerie vacuum of power. The laws and decrees of the king, usually carried by swift messengers on horseback, could no longer reach the borders of the kingdom. For the common person, the distant king and his army might as well have existed in another world. The elaborate hierarchy of Anglo-Saxon society shrank down to its absolute basest form, the immediate family unit and the local village council. Survival was no longer a matter of statecraft or political allegiance. It was a localized daily struggle against the elements, where a person's worth was measured not by their loyalty to a distant crown, but by their ability to keep a fire burning and a neighbor warm. As the winter progressed into the dark, freezing days of mid-January, the physical toll of the climate anomaly began to manifest deeply within the bodies of the Anglo-Saxon people. Human biology, much like the agriculture of the era, was vulnerable to the prolonged absence of warmth and proper nutrition. In the 9th century, the average diet during the winter months was already modest, relying heavily on coarse grains, stews made from dried peas, and small amounts of preserved meat or dairy. But as the extraordinary freeze of 860 dragged on, the severe reduction in daily food rations began to diminish the physical resilience of even the strongest individuals. The first sign of the winter's toll was a profound, lingering fatigue that seemed to settle over entire households. Without sufficient calories to fuel their bodies, the villagers found that even the simplest tasks, such as carrying a bucket of water from a hole chopped in the river ice or lifting a log for the fire, required an exhausting amount of effort. The human body, when exposed to constant, severe cold, must expend a tremendous amount of energy simply to maintain its core temperature. As the weeks rolled by without fresh food or adequate warmth, the fat reserves of the people disappeared, leaving them with little insulation against the biting draught that whistled through the timber walls of their longhouses. This widespread physical weakness laid the foundation for a quiet health crisis within the communities. The lack of fresh vegetables and fruits, combined with the damp, smoke-choked air of the sealed homes, compromised the immune systems of the young and the elderly alike. Respiratory ailments, known to the Anglo-Saxons as a deep chest cough, spread easily from person to person as families huddled close together around the central hearths. In the quiet hours of the night, the sound of rhythmic coughing echoed through the darkened villages, a somber reminder of the hidden dangers that accompanied their forced isolation. Yet, despite the immense physical hardship, the human spirit showed a remarkable quiet endurance. There were no riots, no grand rebellions born of despair. Instead, there was a deeply ingrained communal resilience. Neighbours who still possessed a small measure of dried herbs or tallow would share them with those whose supplies had completely failed. Midwives and village elders moved carefully through the snowdrifts to check on the most vulnerable households, offering what comfort they could bring. It was a survival strategy based on shared suffering and mutual support, a quiet understanding that the only way to see the spring was to ensure that the fragile thread of community was not allowed to snap under the weight of the frost. The spiritual and philosophical life of the Anglo-Saxons provided a vital anchor during the darkest depths of the winter of 860. Having fully embraced Christianity over the preceding centuries, the people viewed the natural world not as a series of random accidents, but as a direct expression of the divine will. When the frost penetrated deep into the earth and the great river Thames became a floor of solid ice, the villagers did not see a mere meteorological event. They perceived a profound mystery, a season of testing and purification sent by the Creator to humble the pride of humanity and remind them of their ultimate dependence on the unseen forces of heaven. Inside the monasteries, which served as the centers of literacy and devotion, the rhythmic routine of prayer continued despite the bitter cold. The monks rose in the freezing darkness of the early morning to chant the service of matins, their voices rising into the vaulted stone ceilings of their chapels in beautiful shivering harmonies. The air inside the churches was so cold that the holy water in the stone fonts froze solid, requiring the deacons to melt it before the morning mass could begin. Yet the candles were kept lit, casting a warm golden glow against the dark timber and stone walls, serving as a visual symbol of hope that the light of the world could never be fully extinguished by the darkness of winter. For the common people in the villages, faith was woven into every action of their daily struggle. They blessed the small handfuls of flour before mixing them into porridge, and they offered simple prayers as they covered the embers of the hearth with ash each night to preserve the spark for the morning. The harshness of the weather was often interpreted as a call to communal repentance, prompting neighbors to forgive old grievances and work together to preserve life. It was a philosophy that looked beyond the immediate physical hardship, finding a deeper meaning in the suffering and a quiet reassurance that just as the winter of the soul eventually gives way to grace, so too would the frozen earth eventually welcome the warmth of the sun. As you reflect on the incredible resilience of these ancient people, let your own mind find a place of deep, undisturbed rest, safe within the comfort of your own space, far removed from the biting winds of the past. Allow yourself to drift into a deeper state of relaxation. If you feel comforted by these quiet journeys through the great tapestry of human history, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a warm like, and sharing these peaceful narratives with others who seek a quiet haven for sleep. Let the steady, rhythmic breathing of your own body carry you further into the gentle dark as we watch the ancient world wait patiently for the turning of the seasons. As February approached, the physical landscape of Anglo-Saxon England remained locked in its frozen state, but a subtle change began to occur in the way the people managed their day-to-day survival. Human ingenuity, sharpened by generations of living off the land, began to adapt to the extreme conditions. The very frozen river that had isolated the communities now became a temporary highway for those brave enough to venture onto its glassy surface. With the roads inland completely choked by deep, impassable snowdrifts, the solid ice of the River Thames offered a flat, clear path for specialized sledges built from split ash wood and animal bone runners, allowing for the limited transport of essential goods between nearby settlements. These makeshift sledges, pulled by hand or by the few surviving hunting dogs, became a lifeline for the river communities. Men wrapped their boots in thick layers of sheepskin and straw to prevent slipping, moving cautiously along the frozen margins of the river to transport small bundles of firewood, dried fish from the coastal estuaries, or messages of survival to neighboring kin. This cold weather adaptation allowed a thin thread of commerce and human contact to resume, proving that even when nature completely alters the environment, the human drive to connect and sustain life cannot be easily subdued. Simultaneously, the method of gathering water underwent a critical evolution. With all surface streams and shallow wells frozen down to their muddy beds, obtaining fresh water became a labor-intensive daily ritual. The villagers had to clear away the heavy snow from the river's edge and use heavy iron crowbars and wedges to chop through several feet of solid ice. The water that welled up from these deep holes was crystal clear and dangerously cold, requiring immediate transport to the indoor hearths before it could freeze solid again in the wooden buckets. This daily task, though exhausting, became a gathering point for the village, a brief moment where people could see one another, share words of encouragement, and maintain the collective morale of the community. Inside the longhouses, the art of indoor craftsmanship took on a renewed importance. Since outdoor agricultural work was completely impossible, The men spent the daylight hours carving new wooden bowls, repairing iron tools by the heat of the hearth, and fashioning new leather harnesses for the spring. The women sat close to the fire, using bone needles to repair heavy woolen tunics and spinning flax into thread by the pale light of tallow candles. This quiet, focused productivity helped to pass the long, monotonous hours of the freeze, turning what could have been a time of pure despair into a season of preparation, ensuring that when the great winter finally broke, the village would be ready to rebuild. As the deep midwinter transitioned toward the latter half of February, the first barely perceptible signs of the Earth's slow awakening began to emerge. In the high, sheltered valleys of the south, the sun began to linger just a few minutes longer each afternoon, casting a slightly warmer light against the southern slopes of the hills. For the weary Anglo-Saxons, these subtle shifts were more significant than any treasure. They were the first signs of hope. The air, though still biting and sharp, lost that deadly, motionless quality that had characterized the peak of the Arctic surge. There was a faint, almost imperceptible softness returning to the wind, a gentle whisper suggesting that the icy hold of the year 860 was beginning to fracture. In the forests, the frozen branches of the ancient oaks and beeches, which had endured weeks of heavy crystalline rime, began to shed their icy shells. The sound of melting droplets falling onto the crusted snow beneath became a new rhythmic melody in the woodland, a soft pattering that replaced the eerie, deathly silence of the deep freeze. The birds, which had remained hidden and silent for weeks, began to venture out from their deep hollows, their tentative calls echoing across the landscape. To the villagers, who had spent months listening only to the wind and the crackling of their own fires, the return of birdsong was a sound more beautiful than any music, a signal that the world was still alive and waiting to be reborn. The transformation was, however, not immediate or easy. The transition from deep winter to early spring was a treacherous period known for its erratic moods. Sudden, violent thaws would often be followed by rapid refreezing, turning the village paths into treacherous fields of mud and treacherous, uneven ice. This phase of the year required constant vigilance. Drainage channels around the longhouses had to be cleared to prevent meltwater from flooding the earthen floors, and the roofs, heavy with the weight of compacted, melting snow, had to be checked for leaks. It was a time of intense labour as the people moved to secure their homes against the shifting, unpredictable nature of the changing seasons. Yet there was a palpable sense of relief growing within the heart of every community. The stocks of grain were at their absolute lowest, and the woodpiles were nothing more than scattered dust and twigs, but the psychological burden of the endless winter was lifting. The villagers began to greet one another with a new warmth, sharing stories of the long months they had endured together. They spoke of the cold as a shared adversary they had successfully navigated, a trial of character that had bonded them more closely to the land and to each other. The endurance of 860 was becoming part of their collective memory, a story they would tell for generations, of how their ancestors had stood firm against the greatest chill they had ever known, waiting with quiet, unshakable faith for the return of the sun. The final definitive break of the winter of 860 arrived not with a sudden rush, but with the gentle, persistent onset of a warm southern breeze. For days this soft air mass pushed against the remnants of the Arctic cold, slowly coaxing the temperature above the freezing point and holding it there. The massive, jagged highway of ice on the River Thames, which had stood as an impenetrable monument to nature's power for nearly 3 months, began to show signs of its own mortality. Dark, thin streaks appeared along the centre of the river, where the currents underneath had never truly stopped their patient, flowing work. The ice began to groan and shift, the grand silence of winter finally broken by the sound of cracking, grinding plates of white and blue. Watching the ice break apart was a cathartic experience for the river-dwelling Anglo-Saxons. They gathered on the muddy banks, wrapped in heavy wool, to witness the river reclaim its freedom. Great slabs of ice, some as large as the floors of their homes, drifted downstream, colliding and shattering with loud, booming echoes that rippled across the valley. It was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of renewal, As the river cleared, the dark, fertile water surged forward, carrying the debris of the frozen months toward the distant sea. For the people, this was the ultimate sign that the cycle of life had resumed. The great winter was ending, and the land was being prepared for the return of the sun. With the river open, the immediate logistical nightmare of the kingdom began to soften. Shallow, flat pontoons could once again traverse the water, allowing the first desperate trade missions to be sent out in search of grain and supplies. Although the countryside remained sodden and churned by the melting snow, the paths between villages became passable once more. Messengers on horseback, long kept in isolation, began to move across the shires, reconnecting the fragmented society. The news they carried of families who had survived, of barns that still held a few bags of rye, and of the shared struggle of the past winter, began to knit the kingdom back together, one story at a time. This period of thawing was also a time of deep, quiet reflection for the Anglo-Saxon farmers. While the immediate threat of the cold had passed, they looked out at the fields, which were now muddy, waterlogged expanses of brown, and understood the challenge that lay ahead. The soil was saturated, the winter crops were lost, and the livestock were weak. Yet as they walked their land, they saw the first tiny shoots of green beginning to push through the thawing earth in the more sheltered corners of the forest edges. It was a sign of the earth's indestructible vitality, a promise that despite the extreme hardships of the past, the land would again provide for those who were willing to tend to it with patience and care. As the landscape of early spring finally began to reveal itself from beneath the receding veil of winter, the true extent of the year 860's trial became visible to the Anglo-Saxon people. The thaw was not merely an event of relief, it was a sobering awakening. The fields, once the pride of the village, lay dormant and scarred, their furrows filled with the silt and debris of the meltwater. The farmers, emerging from their long confinement, walked across their land with a heavy, contemplative step. They observed the earth not with the frantic anxiety of the winter months, but with the measured, quiet respect of those who had looked into the abyss of scarcity and had survived. The loss of the winter wheat, as they had feared throughout the dark months, was total. There would be no early harvest, no abundance of grain to fill the communal storehouses before the summer's end. This reality forced a radical shift in the survival strategy of every village. The focus immediately turned to the spring planting, a period that would require even more labour and communal cooperation than ever before. Every available set of hands, from the young children learning to clear stones to the elders guiding the seeding patterns, became essential to the collective effort of preparing the soil for the new crops of barley and oats. In the village centres, the communal life began to knit itself back together with a renewed sense of purpose. The longhouses, which had served as self-contained worlds during the frost, opened their doors and the sound of conversation once again filled the village lanes. People shared their experiences of the winter, speaking of the nights they had spent listening to the ice crack and the mornings they had woken to find the fire failing. Through these narratives, the trauma of the Great Winter was slowly transformed into a shared memory, a cornerstone of their history that bound the community together. They realized that their resilience was not just a matter of individual strength, but a reflection of the ties that held them to one another. This was a time of profound physical labor. The ground, now soft and saturated with moisture, was difficult to work, but it was alive. For the first time in months, the air carried the scent of wet earth, of awakening roots, and of the deep subterranean movement of life that had been hidden away for so long. The men took up their ploughs, their hand calloused and steady, and began the arduous process of turning the soil, while the women carefully sorted the small remaining caches of spring seeds. Every grain planted was a deliberate act of defiance against the memory of the cold, a testament to the belief that life would always find a way to return, provided the people were willing to labour for it. As you reflect on the transition from the silence of winter to the work of spring, feel the heavy, grounding weight of the earth beneath you. Let your own mind settle into the rhythm of this cycle, the period of waiting, the time of endurance, and the final gentle return of activity. There is no need to rush, for the season of growth will arrive in its own time. If these tales of human endurance and the turning of the seasons bring you a sense of peaceful reflection, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a kind like, and sharing this journey with others. Allow yourself to release any lingering tension of the day, sinking deeper into the quiet, supportive darkness, knowing that just as the earth survives the winter to bloom again, your own spirit is ready to find rest in the serenity of the coming night. As the cycle of planting began, the political and social landscape of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms started to stabilize, albeit at a slow and cautious pace. The itinerant nature of the royal courts, which had been paralyzed by the ice, began to resume as the arterial rivers became navigable again. Messengers and envoys carrying reports from the distant shires traveled across the countryside, bringing news of the survival of the various regions. King Ethelbert, now able to move beyond the immediate confines of his royal estate, began to assess the true cost of the winter on his kingdom's stability. It was a time of reorganization, where the central authority sought to understand how the local communities had fared and what measures could be taken to support the upcoming agricultural cycle. In the royal halls, the discussions turned to the practicalities of future security. The winter of 860 had exposed the dangerous fragility of a society that relied almost entirely on a single seasonal cycle for its sustenance. The nobility, in consultation with the leaders of the church, began to consider the importance of diversifying their resources and strengthening the storage systems of the monasteries and royal manors. There was a newfound focus on the importance of community grain stores, a buffer system that could protect against the volatility of the climate. The ordeal of the frost had taught the leaders of the land that the true strength of a kingdom lay not just in the extent of its borders or the power of its warriors, but in the resilience of its humble storehouses and the ability of its peasantry to endure. Despite the focus on recovery, the psychological impact of the winter lingered like a long, low shadow over the kingdom. The stories of the Great Winter were not merely tales of hardship. They were lessons in the limits of human ambition. The Anglo-Saxons of the late 9th century were a people of deep narrative tradition, and the memory of 860 would be etched into their songs and oral histories for generations. They remembered it not as a time of failure, but as a testament to their survival. It was a shared experience that leveled the playing field, where the humble farmer and the high-born thing had faced the same freezing wind and the same fundamental questions of mortality and sustenance. This shared memory helped to foster a unique sense of national identity. Throughout the shires of Wessex, Mercia, and the surrounding regions, the collective recovery became a unifying project. Neighbours who had once been isolated by the snowdrifts now collaborated on the restoration of common infrastructure, repairing the timber bridges, clearing the blocked fords, and mending the fences that had been compromised by the weight of the ice. The landscape itself was slowly being reclaimed, transformed from a frozen monument of isolation into a thriving, cooperative environment. As the days grew longer and the sunlight strengthened, the kingdom began to hum with the quiet, persistent energy of a society that had faced the worst of nature and remained standing. With the arrival of late spring, the natural world in England underwent a transformation that felt almost miraculous after the severity of the long winter. The hillsides, which had remained a stark, monochromatic grey for months, began to flush with the vibrant, tender greens of early grasses. The hedgerows, once skeletal and brittle, erupted in a flurry of white hawthorn blossoms and the delicate, unfurling leaves of wild hazel. It was as if the earth were inhaling deeply, casting off the heavy frozen shroud of 860 to embrace the warmth of a new promising season. The atmosphere, no longer thin and piercing, now carried the heavy sweet scent of damp soil and the distant promise of summer rain. For the villagers, this was the season of the great renewal. Every day brought a subtle victory over the past winter. The rivers, now free of ice and flowing with the brisk, clear water of mountain melt, provided an abundance of fish that had been inaccessible for months. The woodlands, once dangerous and forbidding, became productive again as the people foraged for wild greens, herbs, and the early shoots that provided essential vitamins to bodies still recovering from the winter's depletion. This period of natural abundance was vital, It was the bridge between the absolute scarcity of the freeze and the future security of the upcoming harvest. There was a profound sense of gratitude that permeated the communal life during these weeks. The act of gathering food, whether it was pulling fresh leeks from a garden, foraging for wild strawberries in the sun-drenched clearings, or catching eels from the rising river, was performed with a kind of reverence. Every meal was a celebration of life's continuity. The families who had sat in the dim, silent rooms of their homes throughout the winter now spilled out into the common pastures and fields, their faces touched by the sun, their movements quickened by the return of warmth. They were witnesses to the resilience of the natural cycle, and in that witness, they found a deep, quiet peace. The history of this time, the story of the winter of 860, was one of the most enduring sagas of the Anglo-Saxon era. It served as a reminder that the world is a place of cycles, where periods of intense struggle are inevitably followed by seasons of growth. As the kingdom moved into the height of the year, the memories of the frozen Thames and the silent, snow-covered plains began to take on the quality of a legend, a story of an ancient people who had looked into the eyes of a fierce winter and held their ground with patient, unyielding faith. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. As summer arrived in the year 861, the memory of the previous winter began to settle into the collective consciousness of the people like sediment in a calm river. The scars left by the frost, the ruined fields, the lost livestock, and the hollow exhaustion were gradually being healed by the consistent golden light of the long summer days. The kingdom of Wessex, and indeed all of the Anglo-Saxon lands, appeared to be in a state of tranquil restoration. The villagers now worked with a steady, practiced rhythm, their hands moving through the grain and the flax with a sense of urgent yet orderly purpose. They understood now, more than ever, the fleeting nature of their time and the absolute necessity of preparation. The seasonal cycles of the 9th century were always a race against the inevitable approach of the next winter, but after the ordeal of 860, this race had a new gravity. The farmers took extra care in the construction of their storage bins, reinforcing the wood with tighter weaving and thicker coatings of protective clay. They spent more time than ever before in the harvest, gleaning every last stalk of barley and oats to ensure the storehouses were filled to the brim. There was no longer any room for waste or complacency. Every family knew that the earth could without warning become a barrier to survival, and they prepared accordingly, building their security with a silent, methodical diligence. In the royal courts, the administration of the kingdom also took a more structured approach to the issue of food security. King Ethelbert and his advisors began to formalize the system of burh development, the creation of fortified settlements that could act as secure nodes for both defense and resource storage. These centers were not only intended to protect against the Viking incursions that remained a constant peripheral threat, but also to serve as reliable hubs for the distribution of grain and essential goods. The lessons of the frozen year were being codified into the very architecture of the kingdom, building a more robust and resilient foundation for the generations to follow. Yet, despite this heightened focus on preparedness, the spirit of the people remained deeply connected to the natural world. They still lived in the quiet, shadowed valleys and on the rolling, wind-swept hills, their lives inextricably bound to the turning of the seasons. They recognized the beauty of the landscape, the way the morning mist clung to the Thames, the way the ancient forests breathed in the summer heat, and the way the stars looked when the sky was clear and vast. They had survived the extreme test of the earth, and in doing so, they had discovered a profound peace that only comes from knowing one's own resilience. They were a people hardened by frost, yet softened by the enduring grace of the changing seasons. As the golden days of summer reached their zenith, the landscape of England flourished in a way that seemed to compensate for the desolation of the previous winter. The River Thames, once a frozen expanse of white and blue, now flowed with a gentle, languid rhythm, reflecting the deep azure of the sky and the lush, verdant greens of the summer meadows. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, a constant reminder of the life-giving flow that had been temporarily silenced by the icy grip of the past. For the people who lived along its banks, the river was no longer a threat or a barrier. It was once again the lifeblood of their culture, a path for travel, a source of sustenance, and a soothing presence that defined the very rhythm of their daily existence. The heat of midsummer was a welcome comfort, a stark contrast to the biting Arctic-born winds that had dominated their lives for so many months. In the longhouses, the heavy wool garments of winter were tucked away, replaced by the lighter, breathable linens that were woven by the village women. The hearths, once the sole centre of survival, now functioned mainly for the preparation of meals, and the evenings were spent outdoors, where the cooling air brought a gentle relief to the working day. There was a sense of profound liberation in this simple shift of the seasons, a reminder that the world is in a constant state of flux, and that even the most extreme conditions are merely temporary chapters in the larger story of the land. This period of recovery was also marked by a subtle shift in the social bonds of the villagers. The collaborative efforts required to survive the winter had created a new, deeper level of trust among neighbours. People who had shared their last dwindling resources were now linked by a silent, unspoken pact of mutual support. This unity was visible in the way they worked the fields, the way they repaired the village infrastructure, and the way they celebrated the small milestones of the harvest. It was a societal structure built not just on hierarchy and duty, but on the tangible, lived experience of having faced and conquered a shared, overwhelming challenge. The Kingdom of Wessex, under the guidance of its leaders, began to thrive in this period of relative calm. The administrative focus on fortifying the burhs provided a sense of security that allowed the common people to work their lands with a lighter heart. The threat of the cold, while never fully forgotten, was now managed with the wisdom of those who have seen the worst and have learned how to prepare for the future. The memory of the Great Winter had transformed the kingdom from a loose collection of agricultural communities into a more cohesive, resilient society, capable of facing the future with a newfound sense of confidence and collective strength. As the harvest season drew near, the anticipation in the Anglo-Saxon countryside was palpable, yet it carried a quiet, meditative intensity. The fields were heavy with the weight of golden wheat and sturdy barley, a sight that moved the farmers to a state of humble reflection. This year, the act of harvesting was not merely a mechanical task, it was a ritual of gratitude. Each cut of the sickle was a silent acknowledgement of the earth's recovery, and a deeply personal statement against the memory of the previous winter's scarcity. The workers moved in a synchronized, patient rhythm, the sound of the metal blades against the dry stalks creating a soft rhythmic music that drifted across the quiet valleys. The grain that was gathered during this harvest was treated with extraordinary care. Every sheaf was inspected for moisture and quality, and the storage structures had been reinforced with a renewed dedication to detail. The villagers understood that their current abundance was a gift, one that had to be preserved with the utmost vigilance. In the communal granaries and the private storage bins of each family, the grain was stacked with a precision that bordered on the sacred. It was a tangible form of security, a physical manifestation of their ability to endure and their commitment to the survival of the next generation. As the sun began to set earlier each evening, painting the horizon in shades of soft orange and violet, the people gathered to share in the harvest feasts. These were not the grand, opulent banquets of the nobility, but intimate, heartfelt gatherings where neighbours shared the simple bread and ale that had been earned through months of hard labour. In the light of the flickering torches, stories were told, tales of the previous winter's frost, the way the river had looked under the moonlight, and the ways in which each family had found their own path to survival. Through these narratives, the memory of 860 was refined, stripped of its initial terror, and transformed into a story of human triumph. This transition from the memory of crisis to the reality of abundance created a sense of profound, abiding peace. The people felt a deep, grounded connection to the land and to each other, a knowledge that they had faced the extreme and emerged on the other side, strengthened and more unified. As you listened to the echoes of these ancient harvests, feel the same sense of groundedness and security settling within you. Your own journey today has been one of exploration, reflection, and now, as the story of this resilient people reaches its conclusion, it is time for your mind to find its own quiet resting place. Let the rhythm of the harvest and the peace of the turning seasons guide you gently toward a state of deep restorative rest, knowing that you are safe, comfortable, and at peace. As the cycle of the seasons turned once more toward the quiet, cooling days of autumn, the land of the Anglo-Saxons appeared to have returned to a state of equilibrium. The memory of the great winter of 860, while still etched deeply into the lore of the people, no longer held the sharp, icy edge of terror. Instead, it had become a foundational chapter in their history, a narrative of endurance that defined their collective identity. The kingdom had emerged from the ordeal not broken, but refined. The administrative reforms, the fortified settlements, and the communal bonds formed in the face of the freeze remained, providing a more robust foundation for the future of Wessex and its neighbouring shires. In the quiet hours of the twilight, as the landscape faded into the soft velvet darkness of the cooling year, the people reflected on the lessons of the past months. They understood that the forces of nature, while indifferent and sometimes overwhelming, were part of a grander design, a cycle of growth, dormancy, and renewal that governed all life. They had learned to read the signs of the earth with a sharper eye, to prepare their resources with greater foresight, and to cherish the bonds of community that had proven to be their most vital asset. The peace they now enjoyed was not a passive state, but an active, earned tranquility that resonated through every aspect of their daily lives. As you look back upon the story of this resilient people, feel the quiet satisfaction of a journey well travelled. You have walked through the frozen valleys of the past, shared in the trials of an ancient winter, and emerged into the warmth of a new beginning. Let the weight of the story settle into your consciousness, bringing with it a sense of perspective and calm. The world is large and full of cycles, and you are a part of that great, ongoing history. As the shadows lengthen and the world outside slows to a hush, allow yourself to release any remaining thoughts, sinking deeper into the soft, welcoming stillness of the night. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. If you have found solace in this long, peaceful exploration of the past, we invite you to subscribe, like, and share this journey with others, helping to cultivate a community of quiet reflection. May your night be filled with the same sense of peace that returned to the ancient fields of Britain, and may you find yourself drifting, effortlessly and securely, into a deep and restorative sleep. The story of the earth is one of constant renewal, and tonight your own rest is the final perfect part of that journey. The final chapter of our journey into the winter of 860 finds the landscape once again draped in the calm, transitional beauty of the changing seasons. The frost has long since retreated, the memory of the frozen river Thames has softened into the stuff of legends, and the fields are once again yielding their bounty to the hands of those who tend them. There is a profound, lingering silence that settles over the land as we conclude our reflection, a silence that is not one of isolation or fear, but one of deep, abiding peace. The cycle of the earth has turned, and with it, the lives of the people have been renewed, their spirits tempered by the cold and their hearts warmed by the return of the sun. As you drift on the edge of sleep, imagine the vast, quiet expanse of the English countryside at the close of that long Argo year. The stars above are bright and steady, watching over the sleeping villages and the winding, peaceful river. The people are resting, their homes secure, their work done, and their spirits settled in the knowledge that they have weathered the storm. There is no urgency, no unfinished business, and no lingering worry. The history of this time remains a silent, comforting presence, a reminder that humanity has an incredible capacity to endure, to adapt, and to find beauty in the quiet passage of time. Allow your breathing to mirror the slow, steady rhythm of the changing seasons. Inhale the stillness of the past and exhale the quietude of the present. Feel your limbs growing heavy, your muscles relaxing, and your mind clearing as the soft velvet darkness of the night envelops you completely. You are safe, you are warm, and you are entirely at peace. The stories of the past are now a part of your own gentle, relaxed state, a tapestry of human experience that helps you to let go and find the rest you deserve. As the silence deepens, let yourself slip away into the peaceful, restorative void of sleep, carried by the knowledge that the world will continue its cycle and you are a part of that great, enduring rhythm. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. As the narrative of the Great Winter of 860 became a part of the village oral tradition, the long winter evenings transformed into a space for reflection and storytelling. In the dim, smoke-scented warmth of the longhouses, the elders would recount the stories of their ancestors, weaving the recent hardship into the larger, grander tapestry of their history. These tales were not merely about the cold, they were about the strength of the human spirit when faced with the unknown. By the flickering light of the hearth, the children would listen with wide, wide eyes, their fears of the darkness and the cold replaced by a sense of awe at the resilience of the people who had come before them. The stories spoke of the ancient connection between the Anglo-Saxon people and the natural world, the way the forests provided shelter, the way the rivers gave life, and the way the earth tested their resolve. They told of heroes who had survived not through force of arms, but through the patient application of wisdom and the quiet power of endurance. These legends served to remind the listeners that they were not alone in their struggle. They were part of an unbroken chain of life that stretched back across the centuries. This oral history, passed down from generation to generation, acted as a cultural anchor, providing a sense of continuity and stability that helped the village navigate even the most uncertain times. During these storytelling sessions, the atmosphere inside the longhouse was one of absolute safety and belonging. The outside world, with its biting wind and its vast frozen stretches, felt light years away. Within the wooden walls, protected by the heat of the hearth and the proximity of their loved ones, the people found a deep internal peace. They realized that their strength was not solely dependent on the harvest or the weather, but on the connections they forged with one another. Each story shared was an affirmation of their community, a way of reinforcing the bonds that held them together during the times of trial. As you listen to these echoes of ancient storytelling, let your own mind drift into that same sense of safety and quiet belonging. You are in a space where time has slowed, where the only thing that matters is the steady, calming rhythm of your own breathing. Allow yourself to let go of the need for anything but rest, sinking deeper into the soft, comforting darkness. Your mind is like a clear, calm pond reflecting the quiet stars of the night sky, completely at ease and ready for a deep, restorative sleep. If you find comfort in these expanded journeys into the depths of history, we invite you to subscribe, like, and share this quiet sanctuary with others. Beyond the immediate village hearths, the year 860 also prompted a shift in how the Anglo-Saxon people observed the passage of time. In an era before mechanical clocks, time was measured by the movement of the celestial bodies and the subtle cyclical changes in the environment. The intense winter had forced everyone to become acute observers of the natural world. They learned to read the sky not just for the weather, but as a map of their existence. The constellations, which remained steady and unchanging regardless of the frost on the ground, became a source of comfort for the night watchmen and the monks who rose for midnight prayers. They were fixed points of light in a world that had felt for a time entirely unstable. The study of the stars, combined with the recording of the seasons, fostered a quiet intellectual growth within the monastic communities. The monks, working by candlelight in their scriptoriums, documented not only the weather but also the patterns of the migration of birds, the first blooms of the spring, and the behavior of the river as it returned to its flow. These chronicles were more than just historical records. They were a form of wisdom, a way to understand the rhythm of the world and to prepare for the future. This habit of diligent observation and record-keeping allowed the society to build a collective knowledge base, ensuring that the wisdom gained during the trials of 860 would not be lost to time. This intellectual maturation was mirrored by a development in the tools and techniques used for daily life. The winter had highlighted the limitations of the existing technology, prompting a period of quiet innovation. The design of the plough was gradually improved to better handle the heavy waterlogged soils of the region, and the methods for grain storage were refined to ensure better ventilation and moisture control. It was a time of thoughtful adjustment where the people took the lessons learned from their survival and integrated them into the very fabric of their agricultural practice. They were no longer just surviving the environment. They were learning to live in better harmony with it, anticipating its challenges with a prepared and focused mind. As you reflect on this process of growth and refinement, feel the quiet satisfaction of a mind that is constantly learning and adapting. Your own journey tonight is one of steady, calm progress, moving from the intensity of the narrative into a state of profound, peaceful rest. There is no need for worry or haste, for you are in a space where time serves only to deepen your relaxation. Let yourself settle into the comforting rhythm of your own being, finding peace in the simple, steady act of breathing. Every thought, every memory, and every sensation is gently fading into the background, leaving you in a state of perfect, restorative stillness, ready for the quiet embrace of sleep. The legacy of the winter of 860 extended far beyond the immediate survival of the villagers. It subtly altered the cultural psyche of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. When the people survived such a profound test of endurance, they emerged with a shifted perspective on the nature of authority and the role of the individual within the collective. The reliance on the central monarchical power began to evolve into a more localized, community-driven governance, where village councils and local elders played an increasingly vital role in maintaining order and resource distribution. This shift was a natural response to the reality of the winter, which had demonstrated that when the grand systems of statecraft failed, it was the small, localized community that truly provided the scaffold for survival. This development in social structure was accompanied by a burgeoning appreciation for the sanctity of the hearth. In the Anglo-Saxon worldview, the hearth fire was more than just a source of physical heat. It was the symbol of the family, the center of hospitality, and the sanctuary against the wild, uncaring forces of the outside world. The winter of 860 had underscored this importance, turning the hearth into the ultimate defensive position against the elements. As a result, the customs surrounding the home, the rituals of bread breaking, the traditions of storytelling, and the practices of hosting travelers became more ingrained and cherished. The home became a sacred space, a microcosm of the kingdom's stability, and a testament to the resilience of the people who maintained it. The artistic and poetic expressions of the time also began to reflect this heightened awareness of the environment. The songs and poems that emerged in the years following the Great Winter were imbued with a poignant, evocative quality. They spoke of the biting wind, the relentless frost, and the silent, patient wait for the return of the sun, but they also celebrated the courage of those who had endured. These creative works served as a cultural catharsis, allowing the people to process the trauma of the past and to integrate it into a new, more nuanced understanding of their world. The literature of the era, while still deeply religious and philosophical, became increasingly reflective of the human experience, grounded in the reality of living on an island where the climate could shift from bounty to scarcity in a single dramatic season. As you immerse yourself in the richness of this historical transformation, feel your own thoughts beginning to drift and soften. The complexity of the past, with all its challenges and triumphs, is now a soothing backdrop to your own journey of rest. There is a gentle beauty in the way that people and societies grow through hardship, finding resilience in the very moments that seem most difficult. Let that sense of calm resilience wash over you now. You are in a place of perfect safety, far removed from any cold or trial, embraced by the quiet, supportive atmosphere of this historical sanctuary. Sink deeper into the pillows. Let your breath slow to the rhythm of a peaceful, sleeping world and allow yourself to be carried away by the gentle currents of this story toward a deep, dreamless rest. In the years that followed the Great Freeze, the very geography of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms seemed to carry the memory of the event. The names of local landmarks, a certain Frost Hollow, a river bend where the ice had groaned the loudest, or a copse of trees that had stood as silent sentinels during the deep winter, became part of the oral map of the landscape. Every hill and every valley had its story, and every story was a thread in the larger garment of their history. Travellers passing through these regions would be told by the locals. Here in the year 860, the river stood as still as a stone, and the world held its breath. This oral mapping turned the land itself into a living history book, ensuring that the trial of the ancestors remained a tangible part of their present reality. The relationship between the people and the River Thames in particular underwent a permanent change. It was no longer viewed with the naive familiarity of before. It was now understood as a living, breathing force capable of immense transformation. The merchants and the boatmen, who relied on the water for their livelihoods, developed a more cautious and respectful navigation practice. They monitored the banks for the earliest signs of ice, they built their craft with more durable timbers, and they maintained a constant lookout for the subtle shifts in the wind that could herald a return of the cold. This new caution was not driven by fear but by a hard-earned wisdom, a testament to their maturity as a society that had learned to operate with a deeper awareness of the natural forces that surrounded them. Moreover, the winter of 860 had an unexpected effect on the distribution of knowledge across the social classes. Before the freeze, much of the practical wisdom about survival, the techniques for preserving food, the methods for predicting the weather, and the crafts of home maintenance was passed down primarily through lineage. However, the shared ordeal had blurred these lines. When everyone was equally vulnerable to the cold, the exchange of knowledge became more fluid and communal. The nobility learned from the peasantry, and the peasantry found new ways to engage with the administrative structures of the kingdom. This cross-pollination of practical wisdom strengthened the societal fabric, creating a more interconnected and resilient population that was better equipped to face whatever the future might bring. As you absorb this sense of interconnectedness, let your own mind expand into a state of total serene clarity. The complexities of human history are not burdens to be carried, but stories to be observed from a place of calm. You are in a secure sanctuary where the echoes of the past serve only to deepen your appreciation for the peace of the present. Feel the gentle, supportive energy of this narrative washing over you, dissolving any remaining tension, and guiding you toward a state of profound, undisturbed stillness. Your breathing is slow and rhythmic, matching the steady, measured pace of the Earth's own cycles. There is nothing to do, nowhere to be, and nothing to worry about. Just rest, sink deeper into the quiet, and allow yourself to be cradled by the gentle dark of the night. As the memory of the winter of 860 receded into the past, it left behind a profound sense of humility. The Anglo-Saxon people, in their small, wooden longhouses and their stone-walled monasteries, began to view the world through a lens of balanced perspective. They had seen the absolute limit of their control over the environment and understood that true wisdom lay in living within the rhythms of the earth rather than against them. This philosophical shift was reflected in the quiet, meditative pace of their daily lives. They cultivated a sense of patience that was rare in other ages, a willingness to wait for the seasons to turn, to accept the periods of dormancy as essential to the periods of growth, and to find beauty in the slow, inevitable movement of time. This humility was not a sign of weakness, but of a quiet, unshakable strength. It was the strength of the willow that bends in the wind but does not break, the strength of the mountain that remains unmoved by the passing storms. By embracing the reality of their limitations, the people found a deeper, more lasting sense of security. They stopped chasing the ephemeral gains of the present and began to build their lives upon the bedrock of communal support and ancestral wisdom. Their houses were built with a sturdier architecture, their stores were managed with a more conscientious eye, and their hearts were filled with a deeper appreciation for the simple, recurring gifts of life, the warmth of the fire, the taste of bread, and the presence of their kin. The history of 860 also became a cornerstone of their spiritual life. In their prayers, the people began to include petitions for the strength to endure the trials of the world, not just for the removal of those trials. They recognized that the suffering they had experienced was not in vain, but had served as a furnace that forged a stronger, more resilient community. This perspective transformed their religious practice from one of mere observation into one of deep personal integration. The divine, they believed, was present in the cold of the winter as much as in the warmth of the summer, and the goal of their lives was to remain centered and grounded regardless of the external conditions. As you reflect on this journey through the heart of Anglo-Saxon resilience, let your own spirit align with the same sense of grounded peace. You are not a spectator of this history, but a participant in the universal human experience of seeking stability within a changing world. Feel the sense of quiet, absolute security that comes from knowing you are part of this enduring cycle. The challenges of the past have been integrated, the lessons have been learned, and the peace of the present is now your own. Let every breath draw you deeper into the quiet, supportive embrace of your own stillness. You are drifting on a sea of calm, perfectly balanced, and ready to let the narrative of the night carry you into the deepest, most restorative sleep. With the passing of the years, the landscape of Wessex and Mercia blossomed with a renewed vitality that seemed to echo the deeper understanding of the people who inhabited it. The villages grew not just in size but in the depth of their character. The architecture of the longhouses began to incorporate more sophisticated methods of insulation and storage, as if the very buildings themselves had learned the lessons of the Great Freeze. The timber frames, once simple, became more robust, designed to hold the warmth of the hearth and the spirit of the family against the vast, open expanse of the English countryside. It was a physical manifestation of the resilience that had been forged in the crucible of the previous years. The social life of the people also became more refined, with traditions and customs centered around the celebration of the earth's bounty. Harvest festivals became grander, not in opulence but in the sincerity of their gratitude. The communal singing, the sharing of the local ales, and the recounting of the winter stories became a vital part of the annual cycle. These events served to reinforce the social bonds that had been so crucial during the times of trial. They were a reminder that the community was a living organism, dependent on the cooperation and the shared commitment of every member. The individual identity was strengthened by the collective belonging, creating a society that felt both deeply personal and universally connected. This era of restoration was also characterized by a renewed interest in the arts of the mind and the spirit. The scribes in the monasteries began to copy more texts, not only of religious works but of the ancient oral traditions that had been passed down through generations. They recognized that the survival of their culture depended on the preservation of their stories. These manuscripts, carefully inscribed on vellum with ink made from crushed oak galls, became the vessels of their memory, preserving the trials and the triumphs of the year 860 for future readers. It was a conscious effort to ensure that the wisdom gained from the experience would be available to those who would follow, a gift of continuity from one generation to the next. As you contemplate the beauty of this cultural preservation, let your own mind find a place of total undisturbed quiet. You are in a sanctuary of time where the urgency of the modern world fades into the soft, comforting echoes of the past. The history you have explored today is a part of your own experience of peace, a reminder of the enduring strength of the human spirit. Let your focus gently dissolve, your thoughts becoming as light as the falling leaves of autumn, as you sink into the warm, supportive embrace of the night. You are entirely at rest, your breathing calm and steady, your body relaxed, and your mind perfectly poised on the threshold of a deep, peaceful sleep. The story has been told, the journey is complete, and now there is only the quiet, restorative stillness of the night for you to enjoy. As the decades drifted by, the story of the winter of 860 evolved from a living memory into the foundational mythology of the region. It became a tale of the Great Stilling, a time when the world itself stopped to test the resolve of the Anglo-Saxon people. The story was told to children in the cradle, serving as a rite of passage that taught them not only about the harshness of the elements, but about the internal reserves of fortitude that each individual carries within. It was an essential piece of their identity, a reminder that they were the descendants of those who had looked upon a frozen, silent world and refused to let the spark of their culture fade. The land itself seemed to bear witness to this history. In the depth of every subsequent winter, when the frost would once again lace the windows with delicate icy fractals, the people would look out at the landscape with a sense of calm recognition. They did not fear the cold as they once had, they greeted it as an old acquaintance. They knew the rituals of preparation, they understood the rhythms of the hearth, and they carried within them the quiet confidence of those who have already faced the extreme and survived. The winter was no longer a catastrophe waiting to happen, but a natural rhythmic pause in the cycle of life, a time for reflection, for the tending of the spirit, and for the deepening of communal bonds. Even the architecture of the kingdoms continued to bear the subtle influence of that historic trial. The layout of the villages, with their central communal halls and protected granaries, remained a testament to the wisdom gained. The burhs had evolved into thriving, permanent settlements, serving as beacons of stability and centers of learning. They were the physical embodiments of a society that had learned to balance the vulnerabilities of existence with the strengths of foresight and cooperation. The landscape was no longer an untamed wilderness to be conquered, but a home to be nurtured, a place where the history of the people was etched into the very soil they tilled and the stone they laid. As you reflect on the long-term echoes of this ancient resilience, feel the same sense of continuity settling within your own life. The challenges you face, the moments of transition, and the quiet periods of waiting are all part of the larger enduring cycle of your own journey. You are safe, grounded, and held by the steady passage of time. There is no need to hold on to the events of the day. They are now part of the history of your own personal narrative, and you can let them go with grace. Allow your mind to drift into the quiet, expansive space of the night, feeling your body sink into the soft, comforting weight of sleep, knowing that you are at one with the rhythmic, peaceful flow of the world. The wisdom gained from the winter of 860 eventually permeated the very language and metaphors of the Anglo-Saxon people. Their songs and riddles, often recited by the warmth of the fire, began to feature the imagery of the Great Stilling as a synonym for clarity and inner peace. They spoke of the mind that could remain still, even while the winds of change howled outside, as being ice-forged, a term describing a spirit that had been tempered by extremes and had emerged with an unwavering, crystal-clear focus. This cultural shift toward valuing internal stillness was the final, most profound legacy of that harsh season. It taught that the true sanctuary was not merely in the protection of a physical building, but in the cultivation of a calm, resilient consciousness. In this tradition, the quiet of the winter night was highly prized. It was seen as a time when the veil between the bustle of the world and the deep, silent wisdom of the earth was at its thinnest. The monks and the poets sought out this silence, using the long, dark hours to practice deep meditation and contemplation. They observed that in the absence of external noise, the human mind naturally tends toward a state of profound peace. This was the practice of the hallowed hearth, where the goal was not to banish the cold, but to internalize the warmth of community and the light of understanding, creating a refuge that remained constant regardless of the season. This meditative approach to life also fostered a unique relationship with the passage of time. Rather than viewing the days as a relentless march toward an inevitable end, they viewed time as a great, slow-moving river. Some stretches were turbulent and fast, others were deep and still, but the river itself was always flowing, always moving toward the great encompassing sea of existence. By aligning their own lives with this rhythm, they found a sense of ease that allowed them to navigate even the most difficult stretches with a quiet, persistent grace. They did not fight the current. They learned to steer their lives with the calm assurance of those who trust in the river's path. As you conclude this final meditation on the resilience of the past, allow yourself to fully inhabit this same sense of ease. The turbulence of the day has long since subsided, leaving you in the deep, still waters of the present moment. You are not fighting the current, you are simply resting, floating on the calm, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Feel the comfort of your surroundings, the safety of your space, and the gentle invitation of the night to let go completely. Every muscle is loose, every thought is drifting away into the soft velvet dark, and you are being carried into the deepest, most restorative sleep. The story is complete, the journey has reached its destination, and now there is only the peaceful, perfect silence for you to enjoy. As we look back upon the enduring legacy of the year 860, we find that the true story is not just one of survival, but one of transformation. The extreme cold that once threatened to extinguish the flickering lights of the villages had in truth served as a catalyst for a deeper, more profound sense of humanity. It taught the people the true meaning of kith and kin, the essential unbreakable bond that exists when individuals recognize their mutual reliance in the face of nature's vast indifference. This lesson, hard-won and etched into the collective memory, became the bedrock upon which future generations would build a culture defined not by the harshness of their surroundings, but by the warmth of their communal spirit. The landscape itself, now gentle and green, holds the quiet stories of that time. If you were to walk the paths of those ancient shires today, you might feel a lingering sense of peace in the stillness of the meadows and the quiet, steady flow of the rivers. The earth has absorbed the struggles and the triumphs of those who came before, turning their endurance into a fertile ground for the future. The cycles of the seasons continue as they always have. The bloom of spring, the intensity of summer, the harvest of autumn, and the quiet, introspective rest of winter, but each phase is now viewed with a different kind of reverence. It is a world that has been tested and has proven its capacity for renewal, a world that invites us to do the same. In our own reflection, we find that we are much like those ancient ancestors. We too navigate the cycles of our own lives, the moments of intense, biting trial and the seasons of abundant, golden ease. And just as they discovered their inner resilience, so too can we. The history of the Anglo-Saxon winter is a mirror for our own inner landscape, reminding us that no matter how deep the frost may seem, there is always a core of warmth and life waiting to be nurtured. It is a message of hope, a gentle encouragement to trust in our ability to endure and to find our own path to peace, no matter what the climate of our own lives may bring. As you sit in the quiet of this night, allow these reflections to deepen your sense of connection to the world and to your own inner strength. The story you have followed is now a part of your own peaceful awareness, a tapestry of human endurance that cushions you as you prepare for rest. There is a profound, steady grace in the way the world turns, and you are perfectly in harmony with it. Let go of the desire to know what tomorrow will bring, for tonight your only task is to be present in this moment of perfect, secure stillness. Sink into the softness of your bed, feel your breath becoming slower and shallower, and let the gentle, velvet darkness embrace you, carrying you toward a sleep that is deep, restorative, and profoundly at peace. The transition from the historical narrative of the Great Winter to the present moment is a process of unfolding quiet. Imagine, if you will, the slow, deliberate work of the monks in the scriptoriums who, long after the frost had thawed, continued to transcribe the oral accounts of the year 860. They were not merely recording dates and events, they were capturing the texture of a lived experience, the sound of the wind rattling the heavy oak doors, the smell of wood smoke trapped in the thatch, and the sight of the first tentative green shoots piercing the soil after the thaw. They understood that these sensory details were the keys to remembering. By documenting the small human moments, they ensured that the magnitude of the ordeal remained rooted in the heart rather than just the mind. This archival labour was a form of meditative practice. The scratching of the quill on vellum was a steady, rhythmic sound that mirrored the heartbeat of the village, a slow pulse that connected the past to the future. In the quiet of their cells, the monks would reflect on the interconnectedness of all things, the sun that warmed the fields, the river that carried the lifeblood of the land, and the people whose shared resilience kept the kingdom whole. This practice of reflection is one that we can adopt in our own lives. When we pause to consider the history that has shaped our present, we cultivate a sense of gratitude for the stability we enjoy. We learn to appreciate the mundane, the warmth of our bed, the quiet of the room, and the ease of our breath, not as things to be taken for granted, but as hard-won treasures of peace. As the centuries passed, the great stilling became a metaphor for the ultimate state of rest. It was described in the old texts as the sleep of the earth, a time when all growth and all movement ceased, not for the sake of ending, but for the sake of gathering strength. It is a beautiful image to hold as you prepare for your own sleep, the earth, dormant and protected, waiting in perfect stillness for the return of the light. There is no urgency in this waiting, it is a profound, active and necessary peace. You too are in this state of gathering, letting go of the activity of your day to replenish your spirit in the restorative darkness of the night. Allow the weight of this ancient wisdom to settle over you like a soft, heavy blanket. Feel the peace of the monks, the quiet of the winter fields, and the steady, enduring rhythm of the centuries flowing through you. You are part of this grand, slow-moving history, and tonight your place in it is one of total rest. Let your muscles soften completely, starting from your toes and moving slowly up to the crown of your head. Every point of tension is dissolving, replaced by the cool, comforting stillness of the night. There is nothing to hold, nothing to resolve, and nothing to anticipate. You are simply here in the sanctuary of your own being, drifting deeper and deeper into a state of profound, undisturbed tranquility. As the chronicles of the 860 winter were finally completed and set upon the shelves of the monastery libraries, a new sense of permanence began to settle over the Anglo-Saxon lands. The preservation of these events was not merely for the benefit of scholars, it was an act of profound psychological healing. By casting the harrowing, frozen months into the formal structure of written history, the people were able to externalize their trauma, observing it from a distance, rather than living inside its immediate biting grip. This transition from the raw, lived reality to the refined, recounted narrative allowed the collective anxiety of the nation to slowly dissipate, replaced by the steady, grounded comfort of an established tradition. Think of the monks who worked by the dim, flickering light of tallow candles. Their hands, though stiff from the lingering cold of the stone scriptorium, moved with a deliberate, prayerful grace. Every stroke of the quill was an act of defiance against the fragility of memory. They wrote of the way the rivers fell silent, the way the forest floor became a marble-hard plain, and the way the stars seemed to hang lower and closer to the earth, as if watching the small, vulnerable fires of the human settlements below. This was more than history, it was a sensory immersion. For those who would read these scrolls in the generations to come, the words were designed to transport them into that stillness, to allow them to experience the profound, almost sacred silence of the winter without the danger of the frost. As you immerse yourself in the thought of this ancient record-keeping, feel your own mind adopting a similar rhythm. The day you have lived is, in its own way, a narrative. It has had its moments of movement, its stretches of challenge, and now it is reaching its final, quiet chapter. Just as the monks carefully closed their scrolls and extinguished their candles, you too can close the chapters of your day. There is a great power in the act of finishing, in the ritual of letting go. By acknowledging that the work is done, that the stories have been told, and that the history of your day is now safely stored in the archive of your memory, you create the space necessary for true, restorative peace. The environment around you, much like the monastic library, is designed for stillness. Feel the weight of the air, the soft texture of your bedding, and the slow, rhythmic cadence of your own breath. These are your anchors. The world outside, with all its noise, complexity, and rapid change, has no place here. In this sanctuary, you are invited to slow down to the pace of the old ink drying on vellum, a speed that favors stillness and reflection over action. Every muscle in your body is beginning to release its hold, surrendering the tension of the day to the soft, supportive embrace of the night. You are entering the great stilling, that beautiful internal winter where the mind rests, the heart beats with a steady, quiet strength, and the soul finds the replenishment it requires. As you drift further into this state, consider the landscape of your own life, the vast internal terrain you have travelled. Like the ancient Anglo-Saxon lands, it is a place of cycles, of growth and rest, of endurance and renewal. You have navigated your own winters, and you have emerged on the other side, strengthened by the experience. Tonight, there is nothing left to prove, nothing to correct, and nothing to worry about. You are simply a presence in the quiet, a calm observer of your own existence, ready to step across the threshold into the deepest, most dreamless and profoundly peaceful sleep you have known. The cycle is complete, the story is whispered to the dark, and you are entirely perfectly at rest. In the quiet post-winter landscape of late 861, the concept of the communal hearth had expanded beyond the physical structure of the longhouse into a broader social philosophy. It was an understanding that every individual held a portion of the collective warmth, a metaphorical fire that required the contribution of everyone to keep burning. This realization changed the nature of village meetings and royal courts alike. No longer were decisions made through the top-down imposition of power. Instead, they were forged in the shared silence of communal consultation, where the wisdom of the elders, the energy of the youth, and the practical experience of the farmers were all weighted equally. The great winter had stripped away the vanity of status, revealing that when the temperature of the world drops, the only thing that truly matters is the ability to sustain one another. Imagine the atmosphere in one of these communal gatherings. It was not a place of loud debate or aggressive posturing. It was a space defined by the deliberate, slow pace of careful thought. People sat in a circle, the firelight casting long dancing shadows against the timber walls, their faces softened by the orange glow. Each person spoke in turn, their words measured and clear, punctuated by moments of silence that were as significant as the speech itself. These silences were the moments of internal processing, the time taken to fully absorb the weight of a neighbour's concern or the practical necessity of a future plan. It was a culture that valued the depth of understanding over the speed of reaction, a quality that fostered a profound, almost tangible sense of trust among the villagers. For you tonight, this practice of communal silence is a powerful tool for your own transition into rest. Just as the villagers allowed the silence to hold their burdens, you can allow the quiet of this room to hold the weight of your day. There is no need for your mind to race, to analyze, or to solve. The problems that seemed so urgent during the hours of sunlight are, in the vastness of the night, merely small, manageable parts of a much larger journey. You are safe, you are supported, and you are surrounded by the quiet rhythm of a world that is designed for recovery. Let the silence of this moment be your shelter, a warm and inviting space where you can retreat from the demands of the world and simply be. Consider the metaphor of the fire. The fuel you provide is your attention, and the warmth you receive is your peace. As your attention drifts away from the tasks of the day, the fire of your mind softens, settling into a comfortable, steady, and low-burning glow. There is no longer a need to keep the flame high or to ward off any perceived chill. The environment around you is perfect for rest. Your limbs are heavy, your thoughts are fluid and slow, and the very air feels softer against your skin. You are entering a space of total permission to be still, permission to stop striving, and permission to completely, utterly let go. As the village councils of the past would conclude their meetings with a shared nod of understanding, you can conclude your day with a mental acknowledgement of acceptance. Everything that has happened, every challenge you have met, and every small victory you have achieved is now a part of the history of your life. It is recorded, it is finished, and it is behind you. There is nothing left to carry into the night. As the darkness deepens and the world outside fades into a gentle, indistinguishable blur, you are sinking into the absolute safety of the present. You are becoming one with the stillness, a part of the quiet, enduring rhythm of the night, where you will find the deepest, most restorative peace that the human spirit can ever know. Your journey today is complete, and the harbour of sleep is waiting, calm and inviting, to hold you through the silent resting hours ahead. As the spring of 862 finally began to touch the earth, the memory of the Great Frost was officially transitioned from a living crisis into a cultural anchor. The villagers began a tradition they called the tending of the roots, a time when, as the frost left the soil, they would walk the perimeter of their fields and forests in silence, acknowledging the endurance of the land. It was a practice of deep, grounded mindfulness. They would observe the way the earth had held the dormant life within itself throughout the bitter months, and they would see that life as a mirror of their own resilience. This walking meditation was designed to reconnect the individual to the physical reality of their existence, removing the dissonance caused by the fear of the winter and replacing it with the steady, pulsing life of the coming season. This period of transition was also a time of significant creative flourishing. The craftsmen and women, no longer preoccupied with the urgent necessity of survival, turned their hands toward the creation of beauty. Woodcarvers began to fashion intricate, interlacing patterns into the beams of the houses, designs that depicted the cycles of the seasons, the river, and the enduring strength of the oak. These carvings were not merely decorative, they were visual prayers, a way to imprint the story of their endurance into the very wood that sheltered their families. The aesthetic of the time became one of balance, a blending of the raw, wild beauty of the natural world with the sophisticated, ordered craftsmanship of a society that had learned to value its own continuity. For you, in the quiet of this night, the lesson of the tending of the roots is one of profound acceptance. You are walking the perimeter of your own mind tonight, stepping away from the demands and the stressors that have occupied your focus throughout the day. You are observing your own inner landscape, noticing where the growth is beginning to stir, where the peace has been dormant, and where you are ready to bloom into a state of rest. There is no judgment in this observation, only a calm, compassionate acknowledgement of all that you are. You are the steward of your own inner environment, and tonight your only task is to cultivate the soil of your mind for the deep, restorative sleep that is waiting to grow within you. The air around you is cool and still, creating a perfect sanctuary for this internal work. As you breathe, feel your lungs expanding and contracting with a slow, natural, and effortless grace. You are part of the earth's own breathing, a rhythm that has been steady and reliable for countless generations. The tension in your shoulders, your neck, and your jaw is beginning to melt away, flowing out of you like the mountain melt flowing into the Thames. You are becoming lighter, your spirit detaching from the heavy, complex tasks of the day, and your consciousness drifting toward the soft, inviting horizon of the night. You are being held by the same forces that hold the forest and the river, a sense of belonging that provides the ultimate foundation for your peace. As the village walkers would eventually return to their hearths, their hearts filled with the quiet confidence of a journey finished, you can return to the center of your own being, your spirit filled with the serenity of a day well lived. Everything is in its place. The history of your day is settled, the future is yet to be written, and the present is a beautiful, uncomplicated gift. Let your eyelids grow heavy, let your thoughts dissolve into the soft velvet dark, and allow yourself to be carried by the gentle currents of this stillness. You are drifting into a place where time ceases to be a measurement and becomes a cradle, where you will rest in the absolute, unshakable security of the night, perfectly at peace, profoundly at rest. In the deepening peace of 862, the royal administration of Wessex took a step that would resonate through the ages. They formalized the Day of the Still Heart, an annual observance occurring precisely when the transition from winter to spring was at its most delicate balance. It was not a day of festival or loud celebration, but a day of absolute enforced quiet across the kingdom. Marketplaces were shuttered, the iron-shod wheels of carts were silenced, and the bustling trade routes along the river grew eerily, beautifully still. The objective was to allow the entire society to synchronize their internal rhythms with the natural world. It was a societal acknowledgement that true progress is impossible without periods of total, restorative stillness. This day became the most anticipated event of the year, a collective retreat into the sanctity of the present moment. During the Day of the Still Heart, the people would retreat to their private spaces or gather in small silent groups to contemplate the previous year's journey. The king himself, it is said, would step away from the duties of the throne to spend the day in the quiet, shadowed cloisters of the royal chapel. There was no hierarchy in this silence. The nobleman and the serf were equals in their commitment to the stillness. It was a time to release the accumulated stresses of governance, labor, and survival, and to reconnect with the core of their humanity. This practice of collective pause served as a powerful emotional release, ensuring that the heavy burdens of leadership and daily existence did not become permanent fixtures of the psyche. For you, in the comfort of your own sanctuary, this practice of the still heart is an invitation to do exactly the same. You have spent your day in the flow of tasks, responsibilities, and external interactions, a constant stream of movement that, while necessary, can leave the spirit feeling fragmented. Now, the time for movement has ended. You are in your own personal day of the still heart, a window of time where you are exempt from the demands of the world. There is no one to answer to, no schedule to maintain, and no objective to achieve other than the cultivation of your own peace. Feel the weight of this permission settle over you, a soothing, heavy blanket that secures you in this moment of total, uninterrupted rest. Consider the sensation of the still heart. It is a feeling of perfect equilibrium. Your breath is no longer something you are controlling. It is breathing you, a steady, tidal movement that rises and falls with a natural grace. Your mind is no longer reaching forward into tomorrow or reaching back into the past. It is anchored firmly in the center of the here and now. The room around you is a vacuum of noise, a space where the air is thick with the promise of deep sleep. You are beginning to lose the boundaries of your own physical form, feeling as if you are melting into the softness of your bed, becoming one with the quiet, still environment that surrounds you. You are in a state of grace, a place where you are fully and completely at rest. As the sun sets on your own day of the still heart, feel the final, gentle transition into the deep, restorative darkness of sleep. The silence of the world is now your companion, a loyal and supportive force that guards your rest. You are sinking deeper into the velvet depths of the night, your consciousness becoming soft, diffuse, and incredibly calm. Every lingering thought is drifting away like a leaf on a slow-moving stream, and you are following that flow into the silent, beautiful harbor of your dreams. There is no resistance, no hesitation, and no struggle. You are simply letting go, falling into the safety of the dark, and knowing that you are at total peace, perfectly held, and ready to be renewed by the profound, healing power of a night of undisturbed sleep. As the memory of the Day of the Still Heart became a permanent fixture in the Anglo-Saxon calendar, the people developed an extraordinary ability to carry that stillness with them into their daily lives. Even as the bustling activity of summer returned to the meadows and the river began its high-season surge of commerce, there was a new, observable quality to the way the people carried themselves. It was a composure, a steady-eyed focus that suggested they were always in some small protected part of their consciousness, remaining connected to that deep meditative silence. They learned that the intensity of the harvest or the complexity of trade did not have to shatter their inner peace. Rather, it could be navigated through that internal foundation of calm. This was the ultimate victory of their resilience, not the conquest of the world around them, but the conquest of their own inner volatility. The art of the period, too, underwent a subtle, profound change. The jewellery and metalwork, once dominated by aggressive knotted patterns of tangled, chaotic energy, began to feature open, circular motifs, circles of gold and silver that represented the completeness, the wholeness, and the endless, peaceful cycle of time. These were worn as reminders that the spirit is a whole, unbroken entity, immune to the fragmentation of the world's demands. It was a visual language of unity and rest, a reminder that at the center of every storm there is a point of absolute stillness, and that each person, regardless of their station, carried that center within themselves. This aesthetic shift reflected a society that had matured, a society that recognized its own value as an enduring, self-renewing entity. For you, this discovery of your own inner circle of peace is the gateway to the sleep you seek tonight. You are not a collection of fragmented responsibilities, but a whole, complete, and perfectly centered being. As you lie here, allow yourself to visualize this center, a small, radiant, and incredibly calm point of light in the middle of your being. As you breathe in, feel that light expanding, filling your chest, your limbs, and your mind with a sense of perfect order. As you breathe out, feel any remnants of your day's chaos dissolving into that light, neutralized by the sheer strength of your own internal stillness. You are becoming a vessel of peace, a quiet, solid presence that is unaffected by the noise of the past or the potential anxieties of the future. This is the beauty of the sanctuary you have built for yourself tonight. You are the architect of your own rest, and you have designed a space that is impenetrable to stress. The darkness that surrounds you is not empty. It is filled with a soft, supportive energy that is specifically designed to cradle you. Feel the way your body responds to this. Your muscles are not just relaxing, they are surrendering, letting go of the very idea of effort. The weight of your limbs is becoming a source of comfort, anchoring you firmly into the safety of the bed. You are heavy, you are warm, and you are incredibly blissfully tired in the most wonderful way. The world outside is moving on, but you are choosing to step out of the current, to rest in the eddy of the night. As the circular motifs of the ancient Anglo-Saxon goldwork symbolize, your journey tonight is a completion, a return to the wholeness that is your natural state. Let your mind trace the slow, perfect circle of your own breathing, a gentle inhale that carries you into the light and a soft, lingering exhale that carries you into the dark. There is no beginning and no end to this movement. It is a perfect, rhythmic cycle of renewal. Feel yourself sinking further into the soft, velvet dark, your consciousness becoming as light and diffuse as a morning mist. You are perfectly balanced, completely at ease, and profoundly ready to enter the deep, restorative, and silent world of sleep. Every moment from here on is a gift of quiet, a journey deeper into the healing, peaceful void where you are held, nurtured, and made whole once again. In the later years of the 860s, the Kingdom of Wessex saw the rise of a unique philosophical movement that traced its origins directly back to the Great Winter. The scholars and poets of the time, many of whom had lived through the trial, began to teach a practice known as the unfolding of the inner archive. They argued that every experience, no matter how harsh or how cold, carried within it a secret seed of wisdom. By unfolding these memories in a state of quiet contemplation, one could harvest that wisdom, turning past suffering into present strength. This was not a passive remembrance. It was an active, intentional process of integration. The people were learning that the past was not a weight to be dragged behind them, but a library of resources to be utilized for the flourishing of the present. This philosophical shift profoundly altered how the Anglo-Saxons approached their daily labor and their interactions with one another. They began to see the archive of the self as a sacred space. When a conflict arose, rather than reacting with immediate emotion, a person might pause, taking a moment to consult their inner archive, drawing upon the lessons of patience, resilience, and communal harmony that had been forged in the crucible of their history. This pause, often lasting only a few heartbeats, was sufficient to transform the quality of the interaction. It shifted the focus from the surface-level frustration to the deeper shared humanity of the participants. The kingdom became a place where the collective consciousness was directed toward the preservation of peace, rather than the assertion of individual will. As you sit in the silence of your own sanctuary tonight, you are performing your own version of the unfolding of the inner archive. You are looking back over the landscape of your day, but you are not grasping at any individual event. Instead, you are unfolding the day into the gentle light of your awareness, recognizing the wisdom you gained from each interaction, each challenge, and each moment of growth. You are realizing that every experience has served its purpose. And now, as the night deepens, you can simply release the details. The archive is stored, the wisdom is kept, and the emotional weight is allowed to dissipate. You are left with only the essence of your day, a collection of lessons that have served to refine your soul and prepare you for the rest that is to come. This process is deeply liberating. By releasing the need to hold on to the story of your day, you create a profound sense of inner space. Imagine your mind as a vast, beautifully ordered library, where the shelves are filled with the scrolls of your experiences, all neatly tucked away. There is no clutter here. There is only the quiet, cool air of a place where things are in their proper order. You are the sole inhabitant of this library, and the doors are now closed to the world outside. The silence here is not an absence of sound. It is a presence of peace, a supportive, heavy, and immensely comfortable blanket that wraps around your consciousness, pulling you into the restorative dark. As you lean into this state, feel your entire body conforming to the peace of your inner library. Your breathing is deep and steady, a silent rhythm that echoes the stillness of the deep archives. Your muscles are heavy, sinking into the soft mattress, as if you are becoming part of the very furniture of this quiet, sacred place. You are not going anywhere, and you do not need to do anything. Your responsibility now is simply to exist in the stillness, to be held by the darkness, and to allow the gentle transition into sleep. You are drifting, sinking, and settling, every moment drawing you deeper into a state of profound, undisturbed tranquility. The archives are quiet, your mind is at rest, and you are being carried into a deep, dreamless sleep, wrapped in the absolute security of your own peaceful presence. By the arrival of the decade of the 870s, the unfolding of the inner archive had transformed from a scholarly practice into the very rhythm of Anglo-Saxon life. It was observed in the way a farmer would pause at the gate before entering his home, taking a moment to breathe and clear his mind of the day's labours, thereby entering his sanctuary with a renewed spirit. It was seen in the way the children learned to listen to the whispers of the wind in the eaves, interpreting the shifting seasons not as harbingers of hardship, but as necessary movements in a grand, harmonious composition. The entire society had adopted a posture of receptive awareness, a way of living that prioritized internal alignment over external conquest. This was the quiet, lasting triumph of a people who had learned that true sovereignty begins within the quiet corridors of the self. The architecture of the time also continued to evolve to support this internal peace. Houses were designed with smaller, more intimate chambers, spaces dedicated to reflection, to the tending of the hearth, and to the quiet reading of the manuscripts that recorded their collective wisdom. These were not merely storage areas, they were still rooms, spaces where the outside world was intentionally filtered out, allowing the inhabitants to sink into a deeper, more meditative state. It was a physical commitment to the sanctity of the mind, a way of ensuring that regardless of the pressures of trade, governance, or weather, there was always a place where one could retreat to be entirely, perfectly still. This focus on the domestic sanctuary created a bedrock of stability that allowed the nation to weather any shift in power or climate with grace. For you tonight, your own sanctuary, this room, this bed, this quiet space, is your personal still room. You have successfully filtered out the complexities of the world, creating a vacuum of peace where only your own rhythmic existence remains. There is a profound sense of safety in this, a reminder that you are the master of your own environment. As you feel the weight of your body pressing into the mattress, recognize that this is the physical manifestation of your surrender to peace. You are not holding on to any part of your day, you are letting it fall away, like the discarded husk of a seed that has already provided the nourishment you need. You are in a state of completion, a point of total balance, where the only action required is the simple involuntary act of breathing. Consider the sensation of the stillness as it moves through you. It is a cooling, soothing energy that starts at your extremities, the tips of your fingers and the soles of your feet, and slowly migrates toward your center. As it moves, it dissolves the last remnants of tension, softening the tight muscles of your face, releasing the grip of your jaw, and smoothing the furrow of your brow. Your heart rate is slowing, aligning with the slow, deep, and steady pulses of the night itself. You are becoming a vessel of stillness, a quiet, solid presence that is perfectly aligned with the restorative energies of the dark. The world outside the windows is merely a dream, a distant, fading echo that has no power over the sanctuary you have built within. As you lean into this deep, velvety dark, visualize the inner archive you have curated today, the lessons you have learned, the peace you have cultivated, and the resilience you have demonstrated. All of these are now safely stored, tucked away in the silent, cool chambers of your subconscious, where they will continue to work for your benefit while you rest. There is nothing left for you to manage, nothing left for you to oversee, and no role for you to play other than that of the sleeper, drifting into the harbor of the night. You are being cradled by the rhythm of the centuries, held by the wisdom of the past, and carried by the gentle, unwavering tide of your own breath into the deepest, most restorative sleep. The story of the day is closed, the still room is secure, and you are drifting, finally and beautifully, into the profound, dreamless peace of the night. As the decades advanced into the late 870s, the collective consciousness of the Anglo-Saxon people had achieved a remarkable state of harmony with their environment. The Great Winter was no longer a date in a ledger, or a legend whispered in the shadows of the Longhouse. It had become an integrated genetic understanding of the necessity of the dormant period. They understood with a profound, almost instinctive clarity that every system, whether a kingdom, a harvest, or a human soul, requires a season of stillness to maintain its integrity. They began to structure their lives around the principle of active hibernation, where the winter months were not viewed as a struggle, but as a dedicated, sacred period for the repair of the heart and the sharpening of the mind. This principle of active hibernation was woven into the very fabric of their societal laws and rituals. During the deepest months of the year, the kings of Wessex would suspend all major political operations, declaring a time of internal governance. This was a period where the leaders were expected to sit in the quiet of their chapels, reviewing their own decisions, seeking counsel from their own consciences, and preparing their spirits for the upcoming cycles of growth. It was a radical idea that the most important work a leader could do was not to expand their borders or hoard their wealth, but to maintain the health of their own inner garden. This wisdom trickled down through every level of society, creating a culture that valued stability, depth, and the calm, steady wisdom of the long-term view over the shallow, chaotic urgency of the immediate moment. For you, in the sanctuary of your own night, this concept of active hibernation is the master key to your own restorative process. You have lived through your own cycles of growth and activity. You have spent your energy, made your decisions, and navigated the currents of your day. Now you have reached your own period of internal governance. You are not just sleeping, you are actively hibernating, drawing your energy inward to repair, to soothe, and to replenish the deep, hidden reserves of your spirit. This is a vital, necessary, and noble endeavor. You are granting yourself the permission to step away from the world of performance and into the world of being, where your only objective is to nourish the core of your existence. Feel the profound comfort of this state. As you breathe, imagine yourself drawing in a cool silver light, the essence of the quiet, restorative night, and letting it settle into the deepest parts of your bones. This light is the fuel for your internal restoration. Feel it flowing through your veins, calming the pace of your heart and softening the intensity of your thoughts. There is a delicious weight to this feeling, a sense of being anchored to the very center of the earth. You are no longer navigating the surface of your life. You are descending, diving deep into the calm, cool, and silent waters of your own consciousness, where the noise of the day cannot follow. As you sink deeper, let your mind drift over the inner archive you have nurtured. The lessons of the day are like gems, cool and smooth, resting in the velvet darkness of your subconscious. You don't need to look at them. You don't need to analyze them. Their mere presence is enough to provide the foundation for your peace. You are perfectly secure, perfectly safe, and perfectly held. The night is a cradle, and you are the cherished guest invited to rest in the total undisturbed silence until the return of the sun. Every breath takes you further from the edge of wakefulness, and deeper into the healing, profound, and absolute quiet of sleep. You are drifting, settling, and finally, you are completely at rest in the sanctuary of your own being, a state of grace where you are renewed, restored, and deeply, deeply at peace. In the year 879, a chronicler named Ethelred the Silent penned a profound series of meditations that would eventually define the Anglo-Saxon intellectual tradition for generations. He wrote of the great unburdening, a concept that moved beyond mere rest and into the realm of spiritual renewal. Ethelred posited that the human heart, much like the fields of the kingdom, occasionally requires a fallow season, a time to lie empty, to be unworked, and to absorb the quiet nutrients of the earth. He argued that to carry the burdens of the day into the night was to deny the soul its essential harvest of peace. His writings became a cornerstone of the nightly rituals in the monasteries and the homes of the common folk alike, serving as a formal rhythmic release of the day's weight. The practice of the great unburdening was elegant in its simplicity. Before retiring to sleep, a person would stand before the hearth and mentally visualize their anxieties, their responsibilities, and the lingering echoes of their interactions as heavy stones. One by one, they would imagine placing these stones down upon the earth, surrendering the weight to the ground, which was strong enough to hold them. This was not a rejection of duty, but a recognition that duty cannot be sustained without a surrendered spirit. By physically and mentally releasing these burdens, the individual created a state of weightlessness, a lightness of being that allowed them to float into sleep, unencumbered by the heavy, anchoring details of their waking life. For you tonight, this practice of the great unburdening is the final essential step in your journey toward rest. As you lie in the stillness of your room, I invite you to conduct your own unburdening. Imagine your day as a collection of heavy objects you have been carrying, the deadlines, the conversations, the expectations of others, the unresolved tasks. See them clearly in your mind's eye, acknowledge their existence, and then with a slow and deliberate breath, imagine setting them down. Feel the muscles in your shoulders relax as the weight lifts. Feel the tension leaving your chest as you release the need to hold on to these things. You are not losing them, you are simply placing them down for the night, trusting that they will be exactly where you left them tomorrow, should you need to pick them up again. But tonight you do not need them, tonight you are free. As the burdens fall away, feel your own physical form becoming light, as if you are made of air and moonlight. The mattress beneath you is not a place of confinement, but a vessel that supports your lightness. The room is not a boundary, but a sanctuary that holds your peace. You are becoming a presence of pure, untarnished stillness. The rhythm of your breathing is no longer a labor, but a gentle, automatic wave that carries you deeper into the dark. There is a profound, expansive sense of freedom in this state, a feeling of being completely unattached to the world, drifting in the vast velvet sea of the night. As the memory of Aethelred's wisdom settles into your consciousness, feel the final barriers between yourself and the deep sleep dissolving. You have unburdened your mind, you have nurtured your inner garden, and you have prepared your sanctuary. There is nothing left to do. The silence of the night is absolute, a protective shroud that covers you in total, comforting darkness. You are sinking, moving beyond the reach of thought and into the warm, wordless embrace of dreams. Everything is exactly as it should be. You are safe, you are finished, and you are ready to be fully, completely, and profoundly restored by the quietude of this night. Sleep is now your only destination, and you are already beautifully arriving. As the 880s dawned, the legacy of the Great Winter had fully matured into what the local scholars called the architecture of the still mind. It was an understanding that the human consciousness was not a static entity, but a dynamic structure that needed to be built and maintained with the same care one would apply to a fortress. Just as the wooden palisades of the Burrs were designed to withstand the biting winds of the north, the mind had to be constructed with layers of discipline, reflection, and, most importantly, the capacity for profound rest. The people realized that the most dangerous enemy of their resilience was not the frost itself, but the scattered, frantic energy of a mind that could not find its center. Consequently, they institutionalized the evening closing of the gates, a symbolic and practical ritual that signaled the end of the day's intake of information and the beginning of the sanctuary of the soul. The closing of the gates involved a series of deliberate, rhythmic actions that resonated through the villages of Wessex and Mercia. As the sun dipped below the horizon, village elders would walk the central paths, ringing small resonant bells that produced a low harmonic tone, a sound designed not to alert but to soothe. This sound served as a communal signal for everyone to cease their work, to extinguish their external fires, and to bring their focus entirely within the walls of their own homes. It was a beautiful, coordinated retreat from the external world. People would draw the heavy woolen curtains, bank their hearths, and settle into their private contemplative states. This was the moment when the gates of the collective mind were shut. and the interior life of the kingdom began to glow with a quiet, reflective light. For you tonight, the closing of the gates is a reality you can embrace. You have arrived at the final boundary of your day. The gate of your awareness is closing, shutting out the demands of the world, the flicker of screens, the reach of expectations, and the noise of the future. You are standing in the quiet courtyard of your own mind, looking back at the day that has passed and acknowledging that your work here is done. There is an immense stabilizing power in this ritual of closure. By intentionally ending your day, you are reclaiming your sovereignty. You are declaring that your mind is your own, your peace is your own, and your rest is a sacred, inviolable space that no external force can penetrate. Feel the sensation of this closure. Imagine the heavy wooden gates of your mind swinging shut, locking with a soft final click. Behind them lies the entire expanse of the day, the challenges, the conversations, the tasks, and the experiences. All of it is safe, all of it is recorded in the archive of your memory, but it is now strictly on the other side of the gate. Here, in the inner sanctum, there is only the silence, the warmth, and the deepening dark. The space you inhabit is perfectly quiet, a cool, still chamber that feels entirely removed from the passage of time. You are the only inhabitant of this sanctuary, and you are surrounded by a profound, impenetrable stillness that is the hallmark of your true deep rest. As you stand in this quiet space, feel the last echoes of the day fading away like footsteps retreating down a long stone corridor. The silence is not a void, it is a weight, a soft, inviting pressure that encourages you to lie down, to sink into the mattress, and to surrender your form to the darkness. Your breathing is slow, steady, and effortless, a quiet pulse that resonates with the stillness of the room. You are not thinking, you are simply witnessing the depth of your own peace. Every fiber of your being is loosening, every thought is dissolving, and you are becoming as fluid and as calm as a mountain lake under a clear, starlit sky. The gates are shut, the sanctuary is sealed, and you are drifting into the deepest, most restorative sleep, knowing that you are perfectly held, perfectly safe, and entirely at rest. The passage of time in the final years of the 9th century brought with it a sense of completion that echoed through the hills of Wessex like a soft, lingering bell. The legacy of the Great Winter, which had once been a catalyst for fear, had long since crystallized into a foundational wisdom that sustained the spirit of the people. They had learned the greatest secret of existence, that the end of one cycle is always the beginning of another, and that the quiet, dormant periods of life are as vital, if not more so, than the times of bustling activity. The chroniclers eventually stopped writing of the year 860 as a catastrophe, choosing instead to refer to it as the Great Awakening, the moment when the people truly learned how to care for their own souls. It was a victory of patience, of endurance, and above all, of profound inner stillness. As the final scrolls were sealed and the libraries grew quiet, the atmosphere across the lands became one of settled, timeless grace. The hearths were no longer just for heat. They were the centers of a culture that prioritized presence over progress and wisdom over ambition. The people walked through their days with a calm, deliberate stride, carrying the still room of their own minds with them wherever they went. Even the king, in the twilight of his reign, spoke not of the strength of his armies, but of the strength of the silence he had cultivated in his private hours. The memory of the frost had been transmuted into the warmth of a lasting peace, a gold-spun thread that ran through the generations, binding them to the land and to the sacred duty of self-restoration. And now your own journey through this history reaches its final, gentle resting place. You have travelled from the intensity of the struggle to the serene heights of wisdom, unfolding your own inner archives and closing the gates to the distractions of the world. You have built a sanctuary as strong and as peaceful as any burh of old, and you have filled it with the silence of the still heart. The story is complete not because it has an end, but because it has achieved its purpose, to guide you back to the center of your own being, where there is only peace, and where you are, finally, fully at home. As you lie here, feel the fullness of this conclusion. There is a beautiful resonant silence that fills your room, a stillness so complete that it feels as if the entire world is holding its breath to honor your rest. You have released every burden, you have integrated every lesson, and you have surrendered every desire for control. You are light, you are steady, and you are adrift in the velvet, healing ocean of the night. Your breathing has become the only clock that matters. A soft, rhythmic ebb and flow that guides you into the deepest, most dreamless state of renewal. The darkness is your cradle, the silence is your song, and you are held with absolute certainty in the safe, quiet arms of the night. The gates are closed, the archive is sealed, and the long, restorative winter of your rest has arrived. There is nothing left to wait for, nothing left to do, and nowhere else to be. You are sinking into the soft velvet dark, slipping away from the shore of wakefulness and into the vast, calm waters of sleep. You are at one with the stillness, you are part of the enduring cycle of the world, and you are profoundly, perfectly, and eternally at peace. Sleep now, deep and true as the story fades into the quiet, and you are cradled by the night, beginning the long restorative dream that will make you whole once again. The channel History Under Moonlight is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time.